Welcome to the Business Mechanics Show. This is your host, Vaughn Sigmund, with a results-driven leadership where we help you move from manager to leader. We've got all the tools, the knowledge, and the resources you need to advance your career, advance your team, and just be better at being a manager and a leader. Today's show got prompted by one of my attendees this week at a training session. She was in her second month or so of training with me and her team. And thank you, Navina, for prompting me to do this show today. She and I were talking about DISC, her DISC profile. And she said, "Have you ever done a podcast on DISC? I want to go back and listen to it." And I had to stop for a minute. And in all these years, no, I haven't done a show talking about DISC, explaining DISC, the value of DISC, how DISC works, what it tells you, what it doesn't tell you. And so today, this is going to be a little longer podcast because I can get a little long-winded on this, but I'm going to go in a fair level of detail on what DISC, the DISC profile is. And with that, let's get started. So DISC. It starts with people are different. However, they're predictably different. And with DISC, it helps you understand, based on the dominance, influence, stability, and compliance, on those four scales, what your style is. Where do you fall and what blend is your DISC style? With that, and with the knowledge you're going to get with today's show, you're also going to be able to start recognizing the styles of others. And the real value of DISC is, once you know yourself and start recognizing it in others, is to be able to then understand how you might need to adapt a little bit in order to interact with others in the most beneficial way. I've provided this session today, either individually or in groups, probably north of 1,000 times. That's no exaggeration. And almost, and I can't think of a single time it wasn't, so I'm going to say every time, post this meeting, the participants in the discussion walk out with a fairly new outlook on their coworkers and themselves, on their boss and themselves. And when we can start talking in DISC language within our teams, with our employees, with our bosses, with our peers, when we can start thinking about and communicating using the DISC approach, the DISC understanding, it changes the game. I've seen this change the dynamics, the inner workings of teams of all sizes, of all types, nonprofit, aerospace, industrial sales, you name it. B2B, B2C, no matter the industry, the size, the type of company, this works with everybody. I'm a huge fan of it, and I'll get out there right now that I provide DISC profiles, DISC assessments, and in fact, I'll put it in the show notes. If you have not gotten your own DISC profile, I'll put in the link. I'll put a link in the show notes for you to go in and get a free DISC profile for yourself. And then you might want to re-listen to this show so that you've got then a deeper understanding of what that report is telling you. And so let me get into a few details about this. Now, a few weeks ago, I had a gentleman who was about to take the DISC test, and he was really nervous about it. I don't know why he was, but he had some perceptions around this report that I produced and how it was going to expose him in some way as being weak or inadequate, or, I mean, like he was hiding something. And let's start out right in the beginning to understand there is no right answers. There's no wrong answers. There's no better answers. There's no better person. There's no better profile. There's no right or wrong. There's no black or white to a DISC profile. You are what you are. And from the beginning, understand that Once you're wired north of the age of about 23, 24 years old, you're set. You're set as to the human and the personality that you are. And as you start looking at these profiles, there may be elements of a profile that you're not. You say, boy, I want to be more of that. I need to be more D, or I need to be more I. Well, you can to some small degrees, but if you're already a high S or a high C, and I'm going to talk about what all that means in just a minute, you cannot change what your dominant personality trait is. All the training, all the effort in the world cannot change that. You are who you are. But once you recognize how you're made up, and you can recognize this in others, you can adapt for short periods of time to become a little more of that if you put your mind to it, and then go back to your natural state. That's one of the tools. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So there are basically 4 styles. And these 4 DISC styles are dominance, which is demanding. They're the doers, they're determiners. There's no quit in somebody on the DISC scale that's a really high D. Their dominant score, their highest score is in the D, or the red bar on the graph that's on the pages. They're very quick deciders. They get stuff done, and they get it done quickly. And they're 3% of the population, because they're also, D stands for disagreeable. They're very, very, very opinionated in the ways and the control they want to put on things, because they're going to get it done. More about that later. They're 3% because God saw in their wisdom that if I made any more of the population more than 3% Ds, we'd be fighting all the time. We'd be stepping all over each other. And I say that lovingly to all the Ds, and I happen to have a fair amount of D in me, so I'm also talking about myself. So those are the Ds, about 3% of the population. I's, so the D and the I. I are the influencers. They're the people. They're inspiring, they're creative, they're interested in you, and they sometimes can be very interesting. They're very interactive. They've never met a stranger. They're very comfortable with their ability to use emotion and words to influence through people getting a job done. That's the I's. S, steadiness, stability, supportive. They can be a little bit submissive, but they're very stable. I's or S's love to understand what's expected of them, when to start, when to finish, and they're very happy with following that same process over and over and over again. Now, I got to back up just a little bit. I's are 11% of the population. S's, which makes up the predominance of the DISC profiles, of the 5 million that have been submitted through the years, they're about 68% of the population. So managers, if you get your DISC profile, get your free DISC profile, look at yourself. If you're a high D or you're a high I, you're very creative. You figure things out for yourself. S's are the ones that bother you because they don't have the level of initiative you have. And that is nothing wrong with being an S. They are the bulk of the world, the backbone of our industries. They're the people who are more than willing to do it for the team, do it for the best of the company, serve and support others. And that's where processes, the value of written processes come from, is the bulk of the population needs an instruction manual. And that includes these high S's. I'm going to get into more detail in a little bit. And that brings us to the C, which, if you're doing the math out there, and all the C's have done the math, it's about 17, 18% left of the population. And that's the compliance. C's are very cautious. They're very competent. And they're also very calculating. They're heavily researched, well thought out. They do not make quick decisions. They do not make rash decisions. They're very neat. They're very organized. And they're very accurate. where D's and I's make very quick decisions in different ways. And they are the yes, yes, yeses. They're the optimists. They can get anything done. The C's are the no, no, no's. We got to think about this. We got to come up with a plan. And every DI needs a fair amount of C's around them to keep them in check from making mistakes. Because C's don't make mistakes. They think things through so thoroughly that they rarely ever screw up. D's and I's, hey, we're okay making a mistake. We'll learn from that. We'll brush ourselves off, get back into the game. The C's think it through ahead of time so that they don't make these kind of mistakes. They're uncomfortable making mistakes and starting over. They'd rather have a well thought through plan to get things done. So let's get down into the meat of things just a little bit. So like I mentioned earlier, the reports, they start at about 37 pages, depending on what version you get. 37 pages, they go up to 73, 74 pages, again, based on the version. And then there's also versions within the versions based on your position within the organization, whether it's a manager, whether it's an executive, whether it's a frontline associate, whether it's a salesperson. There's a different report to draw that out of you based on your current work position. And it measures on the bottom right-hand side 2 graphs showing where you rank on a numerical score and a bar graph that is associated with that. How much D you have, how much I you have, how much S and C. And as I go through this narrative with you on DISC, when I, in the nomenclature of the language of this product, when I talk about a high D, well, that's your predominant score. If I talk about a high S, the S or the green bar on the graph is your highest score. So just to make sure I don't confuse anybody, as I'm using this language that I've used for over 20 years, it becomes very natural to me. And I can tell you, again, everybody that goes through this with me eventually starts thinking in the language of DISC, starts communicating using the DISC language, starts identifying people with the DISC, including their significant others at home. This is also a marriage counseling tool. There's been many times that married or people in serious relationships have said, will you do my boyfriend? Will you do my husband? I think we might be in conflict. Oh, hold on. Don't know that you're in conflict, because I can tell you, once you understand the profile of somebody else and start thinking about it in DISC language, they go from just being stubborn and hard to get along with to being a high C. Somebody that doesn't make decisions as quickly as you do, it's probably a high S. Someone who doesn't just see everything and want to get it done yesterday, probably a high S. Somebody that tends to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and wants to share everything they can share, that's probably your high I. And if any of those different personalities, because they're so talkative, or they make so many quick decisions, or they're so hard to deal with because they want to think everything through, DISC will change your mindset about all that. They're not doing it because they're stubborn or hard to get along with. They're doing it because they're a high C or a high D or whatever. So keep that in mind as we go along. DISC also gives you, in those bar graphs, 2 levels of assessment. One is called your natural style, or you at home, you relaxed, and your adapted style, or you at work, or you under some kind of stress. And we measure those 2 in DISC because of being able to measure whether you're in the right role in the organization or not. Does your personality type fit the requirements of that role that you're filling within the organization? And if you adapt, meaning your DISC score changes more than 10 plus points on any particular scale, well, you're adapting. And the more you adapt, the more stress that you're being placed under. And it's becoming less and less of a good fit to your natural style. You see, in professions in life, in your career, you want to be in a role that fits your passion and your natural ability. And like I said previously, nobody can change past the age of 23, 24. Your personality. You are who you are. And so, yes, I do not have a very high attention to detail. Anybody that knows me knows that. I like to do things very quickly. And that has gotten me in trouble a few times in my life. I've made many mistakes, and I've probably driven some of my peers or direct reports crazy, certainly my bosses, because I'm so quick to make a decision and move on. However, back to the attention to detail, if you put me in charge because I have a very low C, which is that data, that logic, that study, that planning out part of a personality, I have very little of that. And yes, can I sit down and look at a P&L and figure out and understand what all those numbers? Yes, I've done it for 40 years. Is that what I like to do? Hell no. I can do it. So it doesn't mean I can't do it. It means I can adapt for short periods of time to get into the detail. But I won't naturally ever be attracted to doing that kind of work. So you cannot make me an engineer, an architect, or an accountant where the work requires a lot of planning, thought, following the rules, and detail. So I wanted to fill in all that. I'm still I'm getting ready to get into the dominant, the D. They're very independent. If you are a D, or you have a boss who's a D, or you have a direct report employee that is a high D, they do not like to take direction. They like to be autonomous. They like to figure things out on themselves. They just tell me what you need me to get done, and I'll go get it done, get the hell out of my way. They're very decisive. They're very direct. The D looks around the room, spots the elephant, and will be more than happy to introduce everybody to the elephant. They say what needs to be said and have no compunction about saying it because it just has to be said. They also are very competitive. They're very results driven. They love a number, and they love to beat the tar out of that number. And they love to make changes, but they like to make changes for a purpose. They'd like to make change to drive improvement. So those are some of the key elements of a high D. However, what do Ds struggle with a little bit? Well, if you're overly sensitive, Ds will struggle with you because they don't possess a whole lot of empathy around your feelings. And if you're overly sensitive, that D's going to bother you. They don't like people to hesitate because they're very action oriented. They're going to get started and they're going to get done now. And because they make decisions very quickly without the need of a lot of information, they're very instinctual. Anybody that says, hold on, we need a plan, that over analysis or that slow to make a decision is distasteful to many high Ds. So if you're moving slow, you're foot dragging, you're taking your time to get something done, you're not moving at a pace that keeps up with what many Ds think can be done, at the pace it can be done, a D's going to be bothered. And I say to every D, and I say it lovingly, because I love my Ds, because I have plenty in me too. If I locked a D into a still room, took away the key, and before I closed the door, told them, when I come back tomorrow, you need to be on the other side of that steel wall. I gave them no tools. When I come back tomorrow, they'll either be on the other side of that wall or they'll be laying there dead. There is no quit in a D. And I also say lovingly to my Ds, you're 3% of the population. Ds also have a propensity to view the world as they view the world, and they cannot, because 97% of the world ain't like you. And you cannot impact or project how you view things on others. Your sense of urgency, your competitiveness, your initiative, high levels of initiative cannot be picked up on other people because they simply are not born with that in them. And that doesn't make them bad. It just makes you unique. So that's what the D struggles with. Now, when you have a D on your team or you are a D, well, they're going to have a very dynamic and engaging, fast-moving environment. They're going to make quick decisions. They're going to get you your results. They're going to figure out a way to get there. I promise you. They also like to prove themselves. You ever tell a D they can't do something, get out of the way, because here it comes. They're going to figure it out and they're going to get it done. They love persistence. They love determination. They love to surround themselves with people who possess that. And if you have a D working for you, they're generally going to be your person that's going to get everything done. They're generally going to be your go-to person. They love innovation. Like I mentioned earlier, they're going to find some changes to improve the process or the approach to things, to do things better and more effectively. And most importantly, you'll always know where you stand with a D, because they say exactly what's on their mind. That's not always pleasant for some. It's not always what somebody wants to hear. But a D is going to tell you exactly what they're thinking. Their opinions do not get held back. I was about to say something that was going to be a little rude, but they offer their opinion. Don't ask a D a question unless you want a very direct response. Now, some of the drawbacks, if you're a D, because you are so driven, so hardworking, there's no quit in you. High Ds tend to burn out because they overwork themselves. Ds also will make plenty of their share of mistakes because they don't take a lot of time to analyze things. Now, that said, and if somebody knows they're a D right now, they've already hackled up when I said that. Ds can process information very quickly and make a decision faster than anybody. They don't, to themselves, need that analysis because, like I said previously, they're okay making a mistake, learning from that mistake, and moving on. There's a lot of the rest of the population that's not comfortable making those kind of mistakes. So you've got to be careful as a D, but understand as a D, you're going to be bothering people sometimes because of your quick decision making and your pioneering style to get things done. And if you are a D and you've got people who are not as aggressive or driven as you are, you can overwhelm them. Be careful. Be aware of that trait in you. Ds can be a little egotistical. They're driven to prove themselves. They can be very status driven. So they want to get ahead. And when I say status, I mean primarily around their career goals. They want the next position. Ds also have a propensity that if you're not moving fast enough to get the job done, they're just going to take it back from you and do it themselves. Be careful with that, Ds, because that erodes trust and erodes other people's ability to learn. They're never going to be as fast as you if you keep taking the work away from them. And like I've said, I think 6 times already, they will also provide feedback without too much concern about your feelings. They can be a little quick to anger, and they've been called cruel at times. Blunt might be a better word for that. Because again, They just say it like it is. Now let's get to the influencers or the high I's, which on the DISC scale, my I and D are almost equal. The I is slightly ahead of the D on my scale. Have very little S, very little C, and we'll talk about them in just a little bit. So I'm a high ID, D being my second most dominant trait. So I can speak from authority on not only the D's, but the I's. And I's, who are the people? They're the influencers. They're very creative. They're creative in their thoughts, their solutions, and sometimes even their art. They're very enthusiastic, very optimistic. And they love to get things done through people. They love to collaborate, work with others. They solve problems within the organization by looking at the people part of it first, and how can we fix it that way. It's hugely valuable to many organizations. Now, as a high I, you're going to struggle with too many rules, because us I's, well, rules are really just a kind of a vague suggestion. We're okay breaking a few rules because, again, we're very pioneering. We'll test things out. Rules are just a kind of a suggestion to us. Because we are so optimistic, we'll just get started without thinking things through very well. I used the example of a piece of IKEA furniture that you brought home, and you got those 16,000 parts in the instruction manual. Can I get that done? Yeah, it'd probably take me 2 or 3 days, and I'll have to restart 17 times because I won't read those damn instructions. I might read the first page, and then I'm just going to start looking at pictures because I'm going to look for the quick way to get it done. And those instruction manuals, yeah, they bore the snot out of me. I'd much rather put my son, who's a very high C, on it, because he's going to pay attention to the details and do it right one time. He's going to read through the instructions. He's going to follow it step by step. I just make it up as I go along. So caution over analysis, because we are very impulsive, spontaneous. We also like to be liked. We have a deep need for others to show that they like us, that they accept us, because we're very emotional. We're very, not emotional as in highs and lows. We think through emotion with our heart, us high I's. And if somebody's a little introverted, very often our very first reaction to an introverted or shy person is, oh, they don't like us. Which is rarely the case. But that's how we'll initially respond to somebody that's a little introverted with us. When others are insensitive, because again, we do care about feelings, other people's feelings, as well as our own. If somebody's insensitive, that hackles us a little bit. That bothers us some. Now, if you are an I, or you start recognizing this people person, this talkative, outgoing, optimistic, creative, trusting person, well, the advantages of you or that person on your team is they're going to foster creativity. They're always going to be looking for ways to change. They don't change necessarily in the way that D's change. D's always do it for a intention or a purpose. I's just can't do the same thing every day, all day. They're going to change it up a little bit. They're going to try different methods because they bore very quickly with repetitive work. Hard for them. They're going to be the ones that are also going to be looking for the birthdays to bring the cake to. They're going to be the first one to sing the happy birthday song. They're also the boss or the person who likes to walk around and just start carrying on conversations with others. You know, I could drive the accounting department crazy as I go back and start carrying on a chat with them. Well, they got work to do. They got their head down and they want to be nice because I was the boss. But they do like infrequent interaction, or they like very frequent interaction with others. So, and it's fairly informal. Very good at promoting ideas. They generally are very persuasive in their words and delivery of those words. You feel the enthusiasm from them. Like I mentioned earlier, they're very collaborative. They like to work together and be part of a team. And the interesting thing about eyes is eyes will be very happy to be second fiddle if somebody else takes the lead. They'll join that person, work right along with them. However, if they look around and nobody's taking charge, eyes going to step in there and take charge of things. And lastly, on the advantages of the eyes, they're going to create and offer a very warm and caring environment, because us eyes, we do care about people and their feelings a lot. But we have some drawbacks. And those drawbacks are we change direction frequently. I used to drive my people crazy with this because I was always coming up with that new best way to do things better. And what I didn't understand at the time is there's a lot of people out there that don't like frequent changes or abrupt changes. I learned that through the years. You got to be careful. We as eyes have to be very careful at the pace of which we make changes, the pace of which we change directions, change how people work, because that is very distasteful in the minds and the personalities of many of those around you. Like I've said before, eyes are going to avoid repetitive or routine tasks. We don't do anything very much as a routine. We may have our routines, but at work, anything that's repetitive becomes boring, and we're going to find a different way to do it. Because eyes love to talk and get information and work with others, they may tend to have too many meetings. They may wander around and walk away from their workstation and be socializing with others. They're the salesperson that goes and bothers the marketing team, the graphic artist in the marketing team, who's very head down, trying to create some beautiful new design, and the eye is just looking for somebody to talk to, and they may not take into consideration that you're bothering somebody else's work at the time. They also are very trusting. And I can tell you that trust, and we normally trust without exception very quickly. And we can have a tendency as a high eye to overestimate others' ability because we are so optimistic. We also overestimate how we can influence others to get better at their jobs. We think the best of people, and that can get us in trouble. It's gotten me in trouble. It's made me struggle a few times in my career. Also, because of our spontaneity, we're a little spotty on our planning. Can we plan? Absolutely. I do strategic plans with people all the time. I know how to do it, and I can do it. It just is not something I love doing. I don't do it naturally. I have to learn and discipline myself to do it. But in my normal day-to-day life, I don't plan very well. I just figure things out as I go, and I'm happy with that. And we can also, and I've trained myself to do this in the right environment, is because we are so talkative, we sometimes have trouble listening. And our listening is really just waiting on a pause to jump in and talk about what we think about whatever the discussion is. We love to share our ideas. But again, you can, as a high eye, you can adapt to understand that there's going to be times I need to get information, especially as a salesperson. Many salespeople, great for personality, but they can talk themselves out of sales, or they jump to the pitch way too soon because they want to share their knowledge, their expertise too soon in a sales transaction. And it's much more important for an effective salesperson to listen, ask questions and listen. And I do that very well in sales presentations, but it doesn't come naturally to me. I've had to learn to do it. And as soon as I'm out of there, I'm back to my old way. So I can adapt and change, alter myself for bits of time to be a better listener, but it doesn't come naturally to many of us. That is a high I. Let's move to the bulk of the population here. These I's, 3%, 11%, S's, 68%. And S's, again, are the backbone of our businesses. They're very cooperative. They're very loyal. They rarely want to take credit for anything they've done. They want to share it with the team. It's always a team effort. They're very thoughtful. The best way to spot a S is at any kind of, let's just use this one, Thanksgiving. S's will make sure everybody is served before they ever serve themselves. They want to take care of everybody else, and then they'll take care of themselves. Everybody else comes first when it comes to the high S's. They're very team focused. They're very empathetic. They care a lot about others. So let me put this in as a analogy. If you're in a hallway running towards the elevator and you see somebody poke their head out of the elevator, they hear you running towards it, they're the one that's going to hold the elevator for you and let you get in because they care about you making that elevator. Now, conversely, if that's a high D and they hear you running, they're going to push that go button, that floor button fast, 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 because you're going to slow them down. They're going to get to where they need to get real quick. And they don't want to be held back. S's are going to take care of others first. And D's, you know you do that. You know you do. So S's, what do you struggle with? Well, people who are overly aggressive. Anybody that's pushy, as soon as somebody starts being aggressive and pushy with S, you turtle. I call it turtling. You draw into your shell. Unlike the D's, you will not share what you're thinking. You'll keep that to yourself. And that's sometimes hard for D's and I's to recognize that they may have put their S's on their team into a shell. You got to be careful with that. If you're too aggressive, you're too abrupt with things, especially around change. S's like to start something and finish something without interruptions. So if you have a team that has a fair amount of S's on them, hey, I's, don't go in there and bother them all day. Please, you're driving them crazy. Because they like to, they're very linear thinkers. They think in steps. And again, like I said at the beginning of this, they follow the process. The high S's in the bulk of the population is where the need for processes came from, for consistency, for instruction, for understanding what's expected of them. And once they understand the system and how it's supposed to be done, they're very, very, very adapted and adept at doing it right every single time and following it to a T. They're exceptional at that. But if you come in and you bother them, or you're changing how they're doing things on a frequent basis, you're going to stress them out because they don't like sudden change. They like to start, finish, need to understand what's expected of them in every step of the way. That's your S's and what they struggle with. Now, here's the advantage of being a high S or having high S's on your team. S's commit to doing the job right. They want to do an exceptional job every day, every minute of the day for you. You as their boss, as their manager, you just have to provide them with what they need to provide you with an exceptional job done well. S's tend to be very friendly. Sometimes they can be mixed up with I's because they are very interested in others. They're very talkative. They are fun-loving. If you're dealing with a S on your team and you're giving them feedback, do it as a coach. Do it in a way that exhibits enthusiasm and encouragement. Don't do it as a dictator. Be careful with that. Don't be too blunt with an S, because again, you're going to draw them into their shell and they won't tell you you've done that. They can be very diplomatic. They like a work-life balance. You know, you Ds who are willing to work all hours of the day, S's are going to bother you some because they're going to go home at 5. They love to be with their family and they're not as driven as you are to work as hard as you are, as frequently as you are. They like to have that work-life balance. They also have a very strong sense of duty and responsibility. They foster a high level of teamwork. Because like I said, they're going to support the others on the team. Great at helping each other out. They're great teachers. And when I say teachers, not necessarily school teachers, but teachers of others, they're your best trainers or mentors because they really care about others. And they're also very careful about being tactful in their behavior. Now, anybody that knows that they're an S knows that you'll hold your feelings to yourself. You'll see something that bothers you, and then you'll see it again. You'll see it again, or it'll happen again. It'll happen again. You will reach a temperature of which passed one more time, and that's it for you. You will explode. You're going to let it out. So I'm not saying S's keep it in always, because they're going to reach a point, they're going to share their true thoughts with you. They will go off. But then 2 minutes later, they're back to zero again. So it's real important to understand that about yourself, that that's your tendency to do that. Some people as S's have figured out, well, maybe for the betterment of the team in my position, I need to share my thoughts sooner than how I'm doing it now, saving it up, and then maybe getting so frustrated I go off a little bit. But S's are going to have a very nice, tactful behavior. Now, the drawbacks. D's and I's, when you say, does anybody have any questions? Nobody has any questions? Believe me, your S's have a question because they need the details of how to do it. However, if you've not fostered or created an environment or culture that encourages them, makes it safe for the S's to ask questions, they're going to sit there and they're going to keep it to themselves, which often robs you of new ideas or new thoughts. And D's and I's, if you've, and even S's to some degree, if you have sat in a meeting, everybody agrees that's what we're going to go do. Any questions? Nope, we're good. And then you go out in a day or two or a week or two later and it's not being done. That's a signal that you are not creating the environment where S's can get it done, because S's won't tell you they disagree. They won't tell you they don't believe your way is going to work, and they'll passively just not do it. And when you ask them about it and say, I wasn't sure that was the right way to do it. And you're going to say, why didn't you come to me? Well, don't ask that question. They didn't come to you because they're an S. And you haven't created the environment, D's and I's, that allow them to come and ask those questions. Also, S's, listen, they're not as competitive as the D's and I's. And very often I have to temper the D's and I's on the ability or the drive of a member of the S who is very competent at what they're doing today. And they're also generally very happy with what they're doing today. They're not so motivated and driven to go the extra mile to get ahead. They're not that competitive. They want everybody to win. So keep that in mind. Don't try to push them. Don't want it more than they do. Recognize that. These are also very conflict avoidant. They will avoid situations giving feedback and instruction for fear of eroding or damaging relationships. They would rather spare the feelings than fix the problem. Because you've got to recognize that, because the problems won't fix themselves. The situations will not change unless you get involved and share what you think. And that's very hard for you to do. But if you're in situations from time to time that change needs to happen, somebody needs to change their behavior, change their performance. S is you make great support people. If you don't have enough D in you or I in you to be a little more aggressive, very often as a supervisor or a boss, you may be the most pleasant boss in the world, but you're going to have a difficult time growing your people because you keep a lot of thoughts to yourselves and you don't always give constructive feedback. You can sometimes be a little indecisive because you want to do the right thing. You don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to embarrass somebody else. So you might be a little slow to make a decision because that need for being right or hurting somebody else's feelings gets you wrapped up. It makes you fairly passive or procrastinating. The S will rarely do things for themselves. They do it for their team. And they can easily be taken advantage of because they're very agreeable. You have to be careful with that. It's okay to say no. A lot of S's struggle with that word. Coming up on the end of this, the high C's, compliance. And I love my C's because I got to tell you, once I learned all about DISC and then how to build a team that supported me and my shortcomings, I knew I had to have a high C somewhere close to me. Because for all my lack of planning and my spontaneity, the C's could slow me down and keep me from making mistakes and getting myself in trouble. C's are very driven for accuracy, very complete. They think things through and they complete everything with a high attention to detail. They're always to your meeting 5 minutes early. I'm telling you, when I have a live training session or even a virtual training session, I always know my C's because they're there 5 minutes early. And in fact, here's another analogy. If you're in a line of traffic going down the freeway, there's an exit coming up. And the high I, come barreling up next to you. And all of a sudden, oh, there's my exit. I need to get over. The C, I'm going to turn my signal on. That C's not going to let me over because you know what they're thinking? You should have planned better, Vaughn. They're going to get up on that bumper. They'd rather take a dent than let you in. Should have thought about it. Very much on time, very dependable, very accurate. That's the beauty of the C's. Now, the C can struggle with anybody makes mistakes. And I say this pretty honestly. Most high C's don't make mistakes. And in fact, they will rarely make a decision or make a move until it is completely thought out. And if you've ever heard of the paralysis by analysis, that's your C's. They'd rather not make a decision than make a wrong decision and make a mistake. They're very logical. C's are black and white. Very, very logical. Now, D's and I's, you will struggle with your C's because you think and drive things with emotion and enthusiasm. The C's, that's all lost on them. If you're trying to convince a C of something, you got to do it with data, with facts, with figures. You can't do it with words. You got to do it with proof. So if you got a boss, D's and I's, that is a high C, if you're trying to get something done, something changed, get something for yourself and change the mind of your boss, that's the high C, you got to do it with data, facts, and figures. If it's a peer, if it's an employee, if you're a salesperson and you're trying to present a product or a service to a high C, you got to bring data with you and you got to have facts, and they've got to be provable facts because these C's are going to check you. They're going to research you. And if you just kind of sort of researched it, they're going to catch you. And let me tell you, C's naturally are very distrusting. It's very hard and it takes time to win the trust of a C. If you're accurate enough, if you're straightforward enough times, they will let you into their circle of trust. But if you mislead them in any way, that trust is broken. And you got some rebuilding to do, especially if you're exaggerating, because they see things very evenly. D's and I's especially, we think in platitudes, very high, very optimistic, very quick. C's don't do anything quick. They're going to take their time and do it right. That's why I needed C's on my team. They prevented me from doing things too quickly and not thinking things through. And if C's, you've got the D's and I's working with you, you're going to struggle with them because the I's going to be generally late. They're going to be talking in emotion. They may make decisions in an illogical way as you view it. And you're going to struggle with that. But they just think differently than you do, C's. They just do. Now, the advantages of our high C's. They calculate risk. Where the D's and I's see all the things that can be done, the C's worry about all the unintended consequences or the things that can go wrong. They think about all those things, where D's and I's see everything as we can. The C says, well, hold on, let's think this through, because there may be some issues out there that you haven't thought about. C's are very quality driven. They're going to make sure everything is done right and it's going to be exceptionally done. Like I said, very logical. They check, recheck, and check again their work. I can read behaviors of people. At the end of most training classes, we do an assessment, whether it's a true-false quiz or some kind of questionnaire. And I can watch the behaviors of the class, the D's and I's. They just burn through it, get it done, put their paper and pen down, and they're finished. And by the time they're finished, the C's are just getting through the second reading to make sure they understand everything perfectly before they've even started. You know you do that, C's. And God bless you for doing it. They love rules. They love policies. They love expectations. If you're in an environment that requires a high level of accuracy, completeness, following very exacting procedures, that's your C needs to do that for you. They're going to thrive in that environment. And the goals that they provide, they set, are going to be very well defined, maybe to an extreme sometimes. Now, the drawbacks, C's overanalyze, and they may miss opportunities due to their excessive caution. They're also fairly introverted, most are. You can always spot a C's office because it's very neat, it's very clean, there's nothing out of place, there's not a lot of clutter on their desk. You can't see my desk, it's under this camera. It doesn't look like that. There may be a few papers laying around here. But they're very, very quiet, thought out. And they don't have a bunch of highs and lows. They're not going to show a bunch of energy and excitement. And if you come and talk to a C, it needs to be for a purpose. They just don't like a lot of small talk. They don't like interruptions. So you need to have a purpose. If you're going to go into a C's office, or a C, if somebody comes into your office, they need to know that. That's the beauty of DISC, is if my whole team takes a DISC profile and they know that I'm a C, now they know those are one of my rules of engagement. So I'm not being rude by closing the blinds and locking the door. That's just what a C does. C's are also very blunt because they're to the point and very accurate. They're not always going to worry about other people's feelings. So they can come across as a little cold, a little cynical. They're always going to be a little doubting. But that's their nature. That's not just them being stubborn and hard to get along with. That's how they're built. And thank God we have them. Planes will be dropping out of the sky all the time for the people who build, design, and fly those planes. So that's the drawbacks of a C. Now, let's talk about what's next after that. There's your DISC profiles. I've talked about the D, I, S, and C, the advantages and shortcomings of each. The fact that you can't change it. You can't change who you are. I've tried to give you some ways to recognize these personality traits in others, which may shift a paradigm for you as to how you view and interact with others. It's very important. So what do you do now? You spent whatever time you spent on this podcast, on this show today. What are you going to take away from this? Well, the first thing I encourage you to do, go to the show notes, take advantage of the free DISC profile. And if when I send you the report, there'll be a spot on there for you to schedule a debrief with me. And I'm more than happy to spend an hour with you talking through what this DISC assessment is saying about you and how to use it. I love doing it. And like I've said before, I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. This is one of my passions in life. Again, I can't believe I haven't done a podcast on this before. So what are you going to do right away? What I suggest you do, get yourself a DISC profile. And if you already have one, great. What have you learned today that you can take some action on or change how you approach things? Starting now. What have you learned today that's surprising? And based on what you learned, how would you change things? How would you change things at work and how you work with others? And now that you know all this, I'm telling you, a DISC profile for your entire team is super valuable to build an engagement and an improved culture, a high performance culture in your organization. Because once we understand the profiles of everybody and how we behave and why we behave, it changes the dynamics of the team. And that person that's a high C goes from just being hard to get along with. Hey, they're just a high C. That's them being them. It allows you and your culture to dissipate all this wasted emotional energy that's spent on feelings, because we don't understand why our peers, our direct reports, or our bosses behave the way they do. Now you do. Now you know. Get yourself a DISC profile. Here's what you're going to get with a DISC profile. There's multiple versions of a DISC profile, from one that's a couple dozen pages to one that's up to 74 pages. That's the Trimetrics report. And let me tell you, it is very complete. But it starts with a narrative on you. It's about 3 paragraphs about you. And let me also say, most people find that this narrative and this report is in the mid-90s in accuracy. Not everything is perfect, because you're being compared to very broad norms. Again, the millions of people who have taken a DISC. So there's some statistical abnormalities that are going to be special to you and who you are, but they're pretty accurate. And even those who have told me, and I've had a handful of people through the years say, nope, this is all wrong. As I've walked them through the report in the debrief, they were reading it in a way that they were misconstruing. Some of the words and the verbiage in the DISC report can be taken inaccurately as what it's really saying. And that's why you want to do a debrief with me, because I can explain the verbiage and the terminology there. So it's a very complete report. It's got a narrative on you. One of the nice things it has in there is communication tips for you. It gives you a tip if you're communicating with a D, I, S, or C. 3 tips of how to go and approach them. If I'm dealing with a D, I need to go in with bullet points, quick, don't bore them with details, get the hell out of there. If I'm communicating with a C, I need to go in with data, facts, figure, logic, proof. And with the C, I don't want to be giddy. I don't want to be all emotional. I don't want to waste time with a bunch of small talk, because C's have things to do. They need you to get the hell out of their lives so they can get back to work. I say that lovingly. So you get your communication tips in there, and there's a ton of information on that. It's going to talk about your strengths. It's going to share your strengths to the organization and your value to the organization. It's also going to share with you some of your weaknesses or your shortcomings that you need to be aware of, some of your time wasters that you need to take into consideration. It's all about awareness and some things that you might be able to change and adapt to slightly that will improve your performance at work. And the thing that it's one of the last pages in the report is the Success Insights Wheel, which is a beautiful tool for promotions and benchmarking for new hires and promotions. It's making sure if you're making a decision on the hire promotion of somebody, that they fit the right profile for that role. It's fairly complicated. I'd have to do a whole nother hour of how to read the Success Insights Wheel. We'll do yours with you and explain what all that means, how it's graphed, how it's measured, where it comes from. So thank you all very much for listening to the Business Mechanic Show today. I trust you learned something. I trust you'll take advantage of my free DISC offer. And I look forward to talking to all of you again real soon.